Welcome to day 15 of our devotional journey as we look at devotions that are contained in Almost Christmas, a Wesleyan Advent experience. Today's devotion comes to us from Reverend Matt Miofsky. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And he is entitling his devotion, Am I Happy in God? He said when he first read this question of John Wesley's, the first thing that came to his mind was, what's the alternative? If we do not find our happiness in God, where do we find it? He thinks that the usual answer is that we look for happiness in circumstances of our life. And, we've talked about that recently. Most of us understand happiness as an emotion or a feeling that's dependent on how life is at any particular moment. And he says that we can be happy one day on how life is and not so happy on another day. It all depends on how things are going. I understand that. So he's asking us to think about it. He says that most of us correlate happiness with things going well in life. Happiness is a product of enjoying your job, being in a good place with the relationship, not being overly stressed, having some amount of financial stability, or being in good health. When life is generally going well, we are happy. In other words, happiness is dependent upon the circumstances of our life. And this seems to make sense to him. But, he says, it also reveals a problem. If happiness is dependent on the circumstances in life, then it is an unstable feeling. As soon as we experience challenge, disappointment, tragedy, or hardship, we are no longer happy. So we find that happiness then becomes a very fleeting experience for us. But Scripture, he says, talks about a different kind of happiness. And when Paul wrote his letter to Philippians, he wrote, "Be glad in the Lord always, and again I say, be glad." That's an imperative in the text. How in the world are we supposed to be glad always, Matt asks. Rejoice always? Be happy at all times? He wonders if Paul is just being unrealistic or naive. But then as he thinks about it, he says, no, he's not being either of these. In fact, he says, if we dig a little deeper, what we will find is that Paul actually wrote this letter during a low point in his life, imprisoned and in waiting trial. Paul wrote this letter during a time of significant suffering and personal challenge. So Paul was not unfamiliar with hardship, and he certainly wasn't asking us to pretend like everything's okay even when it is not. Instead, he says, Paul is encouraging us to shift our understanding of happiness, to change what we base our happiness on and what we put our hope in. When we put our hope in the circumstances of life, we will be endlessly trying to control and stabilize the forces of our life in a futile pursuit to find happiness. It doesn't usually work. And even if we happen to find that perfect balance when everything in our life is working out, it won't last long. He reminds us that jobs are lost, relationships go through turmoil, illness hits, unexpected befalls us. Putting our hope for happiness in circumstances is a recipe for never finding it and being frustrated in the process all the time. Instead, he wants us to remember that Paul encourages us to put our hope for happiness not in those circumstances of life, but rather in the power of God. This kind of happiness, often distinguished as joy, is found in something deeper, more significant, more stable, and indeed eternal. This is the kind of happiness that cannot be taken away on a bad day or ruined by life's challenges. This is the kind of happiness that allows us to be sad, to feel disappointment, to get angry, to suffer life's inevitable hardships, still knowing that God has not abandoned us or left us. In essence, he's telling us we can have joy in a real world with real circumstances around us. This is a joy that comes not in everything going well at the time, but in the deep belief that God will walk through every dark period with us and will see us through to the other side. This is a happiness that cannot be shaken or taken away because God is not shaken. And God's work to bring about good in our lives cannot be thwarted. As the resurrection shows us, even death itself cannot defeat us or define our future. He says the Christmas season asks us to reflect upon this question. Where am I looking for happiness? Is our happiness dependent on the perfect Christmas dinner or family members all getting together? Is it rooted in a certain feeling that we hope to give or a certain gift we hope to receive? Is it based on details working out just the way you want and your expectations by others being met? If it is, then Christmas is bound to disappoint. But instead, this Christmas, he's inviting us to remember that our happiness and joy doesn't come from life's circumstances, which will be great one day and not so great another. Rather, our circumstances come from a God who is coming to dwell with us, to walk beside us, to never leave us, and to work for the ultimate good in our lives and in the lives of the world. These are great thoughts to ponder this 15th day of our devotional journey together. Blessings, my friend.